Hi, this is Joe Chambers. Welcome to Musicians Hall of Fame Backstage, the Vault Series. Today's clip is from an interview we did back in 2005 with Nashville session guitarist Brent Mason. Brent talks about his influences, the great Chet Atkins, Jerry Reid, and so forth, and just about his home life being in Ohio, but feeling like they lived in Nashville because their house revolved around the great music that was recorded here. Also on this video, there's a link to a place called Jam Play. If you love Brent's playing and you'd like to try to learn some of his licks and maybe even another guitar player that you enjoy, go to the link to Jam Play. Once again, hope you enjoy it. The great Brent Mason.
Hi, I'm Brent Mason. I started playing the guitar when I was about 7 years old in a little country rural area in Ohio, and moved to Nashville in 1981. Gradually got to doing studio work, and that's where I am right now.
So, how old were you when you first knew that you were hooked on music?
Oh, I was about 5 or 6 years old. My dad played, like the old Merle Travis. He played the thumb finger thing. That's where I picked up my finger style, watching him. And he played the Merle Travis stuff. And then he had bought a Jerry Reid. Well, you listen to Chet Atkins too. That was another thing. But then he had bought an old Jerry Reid album, Nashville Underground, and that kind of perked me up. I listened. I said, "Wow, Dad, is that Jerry Reid? Is he doing that all at once? Is that one guitar player? And he said, "Yeah." So I started listening to Jerry Reid, and I had an old Mexican Spanish guitar my grandma had given me, acoustic. So I would take Jerry Reid albums, phonograph albums, and put the arm and phonetically learn his guitar licks, just by ear, and that's where it all started. Then I sort of got into different things like Jeff Beck, and then somehow radio. I was listening to Shaka Rufus and stuff, and I got a wah-wah when we were doing that. You ain't that, those wop, wop, all those wah-wah things. So I got one of those. That was pretty much, when I got the electric guitar, I kind of broadened my whole spectrum and listening to different genres, And then I got into jazz. So I got a pretty good repertoire, a listening.
Who did you listen to jazz-wise?
Let's start out, George Benson came out with it, and I didn't know much about George Benson in his early, more obscure days as a bebop player, but then he came out, I think, when I was a kid. I was about age 17 or 16, the Breezin' album came out. And then I listened to Pat Martino, another guy, jazz. Those two guys, I think, were my influences when I started learning jazz around 17 or 18.
So, what led you to to Nashville?
Well, it's really about, everything was Nashville around my house. All my records were, my dad loved Chet Atkins, loved the Nashville sound, Chet and Bradley, Owen Bradley. They just, we sort of lived in Nashville, but we were in Ohio, So at that time, I didn't really know about LA or much. I listened to music to come out of there, but I didn't, when I thought of recording and I thought of musicians all sitting around jamming, I thought somewhere in Nashville is where they're doing all that. Got married and had worked in a factory for a while, sort of got off track for a while, Well, I got laid off from there, and my wife and I, we decided, well, let's just go to Nashville, see what happens. So, we went to Nashville. I knew some players there already, Paul Franklin and Greg Galbraith. He was formerly with Bill Anderson, and he was a premier studio guitarist at that time too, in the late 70s, early 70s. He got me a job playing in a club down here at Stagecoach Lounge in Nashville. So that's where it all kind of blossomed from that, from nightclub. And of course, when I would write a song, we would demo the song, and it got pitched to different artists, but a lot of people like, the late great Keith Whitley. I think that was one of my first sessions. He had listened to the guitar playing on that. And he goes, I love that song, but who's the guitar player on? I got to have that style on there. It's real flashy and it's hot. And he said, well, that's Brent Mason. I go, I never heard of him, but we got to have him on here. So I went and played on Keith Whitley's last album, Do You Think of Me? And I had written a song on it called Heartbreak Highway that had some hot guitar playing on it, you know. And he liked my playing so well, he said, can you overdub on the rest of the album? It was a Garth Fundis produced album. So I did that, and that was kind of like one of my first ones. Kyle Lenning, a producer in town, called me for overdubs on like Dan Seals, Randy Travis, and that was some of the first records I played on. Then Chet Atkins called me, what was it, 84, 85? I don't want to stick you to this time frame here, but I think it was around there. He did the Stay Tuned album with all the great guitarists on there, Larry Carlton and George Benson, Steve Lukather. He had a bunch of the premier guitar players on there. And he had asked me to play on it with him and Mark Knopfler. So, you know, Dire Straits guy. So I did an instrumental with Chet and Mark Knopfler called Leather and Lace. And I think that was my big break, really. It kind of, you know, was my big break into the big time, because my name was on. I'd walk into the mall and look for the record shop and grab a hold of the phonograph album cover and see Brent Mason. You know, wow. In there, you know, the nobody guy, in there with, there's Steve Lukather, Larry Carlton, George Benson, Earl Klugh, Brent Mason, featuring,
Chet Atkins.
Chet Atkins. Well, of course, Chet. It was Chet's album. You know, he won a Grammy on that album. So it holds true what they say. You know, when you know that whole thing, everybody says Chet helps young guitar players get started. He did. That's the story for me. He really helped me get started. He would plug me anytime he had a chance. Said, who's a hot guitar, a new guitar player you really like? And he goes, well, Brent Mason's there's a guy called Brent Mason. It's really good. You need to listen to him. You know, and so, you know, occasionally he would come down to the club where I played. He brought George Benson in one time, he and George Benson. And it's scary enough bringing George Benson, an African American, into a hillbilly club in the middle of Nashville on Murfreesboro Road. You're taking your life in your own hands, you know. It scared me, but actually it was great. Everybody came up and got autographs. That was just, you know, he'd had Masquerade out about that time and all that. Chet brought Mark Knopfler in, brought who else? Just Neil Sean from Journey came in there one time, you know. Chet would just, you know, everybody loved Chet. You know, Chet's the granddaddy of the guitar players. Everybody respected Chet. And that still holds true. And then any guitar player that would breeze in would Chet say, come on, I want to bring you out here. This kid playing, you know. So it really did spark my career. And then after that, my phone started ringing. I started playing on records, you know. Then we got in on kind of the new Nashville sound that's kind of still with us right now. You know, the kind of Roadhouse. Brooks and Dunn was formed. You know, Arista had put Kix, Brooks, and Ronnie Dunn together. Don Cook produced them, and Scott Hendricks. We went in the old Tree studio, Sony Tree studio, and recorded the first, you know, Boot Scootin' Boogie album, whatever that album was.
Brand New Man.
Yeah. Well, we drug in old beat-up Fenders, you know, with beer spilled down in them, you know, cigarettes put out on them, and we'd plug them in the Tree studio, and they were buzzing, and the engineers go, guys, Brent, that amp's buzzing. You know, can we get that? I mean, we're doing a record. We can't. And I went, yeah, well, it's an old Fender amp. I mean, you know, it buzzes. Okay. So they would deal with it, you know, and we had our amps going, you know, all the bleed and stuff, and we did kind of some of the first records where we went back to amps and stuff. You know, I'm not saying I'm the only guy that did that, but I was kind of in that forefront of that, coming back the old amps being recorded, back to speakers and amps and all that. When at that time they were doing direct recording at that time. And then later on I did Alan Jackson records, you know. All the Alan Jackson stuff is me. Alan specifically wanted to sound like we were playing about 12:30 a.m. in the Bell Star in Dallas or something, you know. That's what he wanted to sound like. So he'd let us take solos that were like 16 bars long, unheard of for a record, country records, you know. Oh, you can't let instrumentals play on this record. They're going to get bored, you know. So he came out with that song, "I'm in Love with a Waitress, Don't Even Know Her Name." The whole thing was a solo. I thought it sounded like a solo instrumental record. You know what I mean? Everybody was going, "Wow, what? That's cool. All the solos on that. I can't believe that's a single. They let a single like that. It sounds like an instrumental." Alan loved that. You know, he really embraced the musician. You know, Alan Jackson. You know, just pull and push and make that sound. Make it, if it buzzes, great. You know, that's what I want.
Do you play any other instruments?
No, I play bass and I play drums a little bit, but you know, never would I say, let me sub for a drummer or a bass player at this point. Where they're the best musicians of each instrument there are in Nashville. So I stick to guitar. I kind of make it simple.
Is there anything that you would want to pass along to a new crop of musicians coming up?
Oh, you know, I get asked that question all the time, and I know guys pop up everywhere. They pop up, and there's some really blessed players. I hear some young guys, you know, because we have, you know, the access to internet now, and people can pitch you songs and say, "Hey, listen to this guitar lick," and send it MP3 now. You know, back when I was in Ohio, you know, in early 1970s, nobody was going to hear this kid play in the middle of Ohio. We didn't have internet then. Now if I'm in Alaska, I can send an MP3 of my, "What do you think of this?" to LA or something now.
I was interviewing Billy Sherrill, the producer the other day, and Billy was talking about coming out of retirement kind of and producing or co-producing this George Jones gospel album. And and Billy's not traditionally is not easily impressed, and
Right.
and certainly is one of the most influential producers to come out of the town. And he said, you know, everybody was talking about how excited they were that they were going to get to work with me. He said, I'm the one that was standing there. What's that kid, Brent, the guitar player? He said, I'm the one who had my mouth dropped wide open listening to this guy play guitar. He said,
Yeah.
So you're the ones that are filling those shoes, and
Yeah.
and as
Yeah, well, I'm real flattered that he would mention it, you know, single me out as being that. Yeah, because you're right, he's a prolific, well-respected legend producer. You know, and I feel now where I see kids listening to me, and, you know, kids 10 years younger than me, or 20, you know, playing now. So, you know, there's another generation cropping up, like you said, you know, what they're coming around.
I hope they keep coming.
What's that?
I hope they keep coming.
Yeah. But I'm not finished yet.
Yeah.
I still got some more stuff to do. Don't run me out of town yet, man. But that's cool, though.